All right, so we left off in the previous lesson by invoking the useState function or the useState hook, and we saw that it returned an array of two elements. The first element is the initial state value, and the second value is a function to update the current value of the state. Well, because we know that this useState hook returns an array, we can use the ES6 array destructuring syntax to assign each of the two elements in the returned array to a separate constant. So let's say before we do that, though, I want to give you a bit of an overview of what I want to do here. Let's say what I want to do with this component is to have the concept of an activated button or an inactivated button. And when the button is active, I'll display one piece of text like active, and when the button is inactive, I'll display another piece of text like inactive. As simple as can possibly be, we just have a button whose text is changing, and that text is going to be represented by the changing state, the data belonging to the component. So let's go ahead and assign the return values of useState to some constants. So once again, because this is returning an array, I can do const, open up my square brackets here, and the names that I provide here will be assigned to each subsequent element in my returned array. So let's say I want to call the actual value that I'm getting back, in this case false, the current value of the state. I'm going to call that activated. And this, of course, is anything up to you. This can be activated, this can be name, this could be location. It's the same thing as a property on the this.state object in a class-based component. It's a name for this piece of state. The second thing is going to be a name for the function that's going to update the value of this activated state. And the convention in the hooks community is to simply use the exact same name, but prefix with the word set. Much like we have state and set state, in this case, we're going to have activated and set activated. So to repeat one more time, because this is one of the most difficult parts of hooks, we're getting back two values. This is the current value of the state, which we've called activated, and it's going to begin with the value of false. And this is a function to update the value of activated to a brand new value. So what I can do here is something like this. I can declare another constant called button text, and I can say, what is the status of my current activated variable or my constant? Is it true or false? If it's true, I can use the button text active, and if it's false, I can use the button text inactive. And these two strings can be entirely of your choice or of your choosing, whatever you want them to be. So now, instead of always rendering the text my text, I can use my curly braces to interpolate the value of button text. So when I save this and execute, and I save this, we're going to see that the button says inactive, which makes sense. The reason that's happening is because we're starting off this state called activated with an initial value of false. So button text is evaluating to false here, which means it's going to the string of inactive, and that is what is being rendered within our button. So of course, there's one big problem with this component, which is there's no actual way to change the status of the state right now, and thus, because we can't change the state, we can't change what the button text is displaying. So that is going to be our next challenge. So what we can do is declare an onClick handler right here on my button, and of course onClick expects a function, so I'm just going to pass it an inline arrow function with this syntax. And what I want to do here is, of course, do something that's going to alter the value of the activated state. And of course, we have a function that's designed exactly for that purpose, and that is set activated. So I can invoke set activated right here, and we pass it the next value of the state. What do we want activated to be next? Well, what we want it to be next is the inverse or the opposite of what it is currently. And that, of course, is represented by the activated variable or constant. So what we can do is we can take activated, and by itself, this would simply set the next value of state to itself. But what we can do is invert the Boolean with an exclamation point in front, and this is going to accomplish what we want to do. So whenever the button is clicked, React is going to evaluate this function, and what this function is going to do is invoke the set activated function, which is going to update the value of the activated state. And what value do we want to provide it? We want to provide it the inverted or opposite value of what activated currently is. So if activated is true, we're going to pass false to set activated, and if activated is false, we're going to pass true to set activated, just the inverse. And now, if I take a look at this in the browser, we can see that we have a functional React component whose state we can alter and whose representation in the browser is being altered by that changing state. So this is one way that we can do it. We can do it with an inline arrow function, but we can also take this function and extract it to a separate function right in the body of our app component, right? Because this is a regular JavaScript function, and the bodies of JavaScript functions can have other function declarations within them to any degree of nesting that you'd like. So what I can do, for example, is define a function here called onClick, const onClick. I'll make it an arrow function. And what I can do is just literally copy the syntax right here, bring it over here, and just gotta make sure I close my curly brace here. Here, instead of simply writing the arrow function inline, I can just pass in my onClick function, which I declared on line 7 above. And we have the exact same working product. And we can also just use traditional function syntax as well. So I can also comment this out and declare another function here called onClick and give us a function body. And again, in here, all I need to do is invoke my setActivated function, which is going to update the value of my activated state. And then I provided the next value of my state, which is going to be the inverse of the current value of the state represented by the activated constant. Save this, another way to declare the exact same function that we pass as the click handler to button, and everything is working just great in the browser. And this is a very simple example of React hooks in action, but I hope that the advantages and benefits are very clear and present already. For example, there is no more need to use the bind keyword. There is no more need to use this.state. Our state is simply present in a plain variable, a regular constant called activated that is available for use anywhere in our JSX code, as well as the setActivated function to update it that is available anywhere as well in our function body. This is due to the regular JavaScript feature known as closures. Closures is simply describing a situation where an internal function retains access to variables or constants that are declared in an external scope. So an example of a closure here is our onClick function. Inside the onClick body, inside the body of this function on line number 10, we have access to both the activated constant as well as the setActivated constant, and we can invoke them as much as we want in onClick. We don't have to worry about scope. We don't have to worry about this keyword. We're simply using JavaScript's plain function features, and this allows us to retain access to all of these state aspects that we declare right here on line 4 anywhere throughout our app functional components. In any nested function here, we can use it. In our JSX, in our return, we can use it, etc. So hooks have dramatically simplified the complexity that is involved with rendering a basic stateful component. We don't have to create a class. We don't have to write a constructor. We don't have to remember super.props. We don't even need to use an object for state. We'll talk more about that later, right? All we have to do is define a plain JavaScript function that returns some JSX, and whenever we need that to retain some kind of state, all we have to do is invoke the useState hook, pass it an initial value, and we get back both the value at its current iteration, as well as a function to update it. And we can simply use those basic constants, those basic names, anywhere throughout our code. All right, so this is a really great start, but there's a lot more that we can do with the useState hook, and we're going to explore all of that in upcoming lessons.